Welcome, and thank you for standing by for today's conference call. At this time, I need to remind all participants that you are in a listen-only mode. However, we will be doing questions and answers today, at which time all parties will be asked to press star 1 to ask a question or make a comment. At this time, I need to remind parties today's conference that is being recorded. If you have any objections to the recording, please disconnect at this time. We'll get started with our first speaker. I'm turning this call over to Mr. Rich Bible. Sir, you can begin.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to successfully deploying VDI with F5. So my name is Richard Bible, part of the Security Solution Architect team across EMEA. And I apologize, I am Australian, so if anyone has any troubles understanding my accent, we'll try and get through it, and then hopefully we'll have a good session. So I think it's pretty obvious that VDI with inside enterprises has been important and continues to be pretty important. But as part of that, there are some barriers and challenges that everyone is facing. And we've seen this from our current install base and from the engagements that we've had over the last couple of years. And we've found a number of ways in which we can help improve the way that you're doing this deployment and make it successful and take away some of those pain points that you're seeing. And just to look at those challenges in a little bit more detail, you may be experiencing some of these or a few of these, but whichever way you look at it, these are probably going to be prevalent in the infrastructure and implementation of your VDI solutions. So if we look at this in terms of complexity, so this might be physical architecture, it might be installation, implementation, day-to-day operations. In terms of supporting mobility, especially with bring your own device, this is going to bring a whole raft of challenges for any IT organization or enterprise. So we can take a look at how we can take away some of those pain points, especially when you move on to availability. You're looking at improving end-user experience, even something as simple as the speed of access through mobile devices or any sort of endpoint for that matter. And then, of course, the overarching issues that you have with these types of deployments is looking at how you are going to secure them. So as a sort of whole, there's kind of three elements to this that F5 fits into perfectly and helps you ease the deployment, speed it up, improve end-user experience, and basically make sure that the solution that you're putting forward is going to be viable and will actually be used by the user base in a meaningful way. And there's kind of three key elements to the way that F5 comes into this story. So I'll flesh these out a little bit more in the next couple of slides, but basically we're looking at ways of how we can optimize that infrastructure that you're putting in place, simplify the way you're going about it. That might be cost or implementation or day-to-day maintenance, and then also unify the solution. In a lot of instances, you can have disparate network, disparate configurations, and F5 has kind of put together a package or a solution that gives you the ability to unify that and make a much more simplified solution in place. So if we break these down in a little bit more detail, so in terms of optimization, we touched on bring your own device. For these devices, especially if you have a roaming workforce or not the greatest 3G or 4G network, having a seamless experience for those end user devices is going to make that deployment successful and usable and tangible for the enterprise. Part of that seamless experience is single sign-on. If you can make a slick, easy to use, single sign-on application that works every time, is reliable, again, this is going to make your life a hell of a lot easier and also make the deployment successful again. And then really as well, these mainstream applications that we use like video, audio streaming, VoIP. If these are able to be optimized to those end devices, then again, it's going to make your implementation much, much more successful. And all of these points I'm going to touch on in more detail and how F5 fits into this world. Now, in terms of simplification, so being able to take that unify analogy, if you can lessen the amount of equipment that you use, have a single focal point for troubleshooting or management or monitoring, then this is going to make your operational costs lower and your day-to-day operations much more smoother and easier for those op teams. And in the F5 world, and I'm not sure what the experience of everyone on the call is, but we have a piece of functionality called iApps, and essentially this gives you the ability to deploy these applications through using a template-based function. So effectively, you would answer a sequence of questions, and this would configure all of the objects that you would require inside the F5 world, and then show it to you in an application-centric view so that you can see overall exactly what's happened with this XenApp or VMware View infrastructure and deployment inside F5. And then obviously being able to monitor that, make sure it's up, available, and healthy is going to simplify your life and day-to-day operation. And then finally, this is really the strength of where F5 comes into implementing and deploying VDI through our appliances, and that's being able to put on these fantastic and granular access controls in terms of being able to create policies, identify where the person's coming from, what device, what operating system, what browser, and being able to put in detailed granular policy controls based on these different items that we're seeing from your user base. Also, we've got a unique capability of being able to do multi-factor, not even just two-factor. As you can see here on the fourth point, you've got Visual Policy Editor. As part of that, you're able to come up with a workflow-based configuration where you could have any factor of authentication you like. For instance, you might want to have client certificate and then pass the subject's common name off the Active Directory and have that authenticated against Active Directory in combination with maybe an RSA token. You can mix and match and put together strong authentication layered on top of what you're already doing with the VDI solution. And again, if you're not very familiar with F5, we now have a fully functional layer 4 stateful network firewall that has a GUI inside the appliance. So this can be used in combination with these access controls, with providing availability with local traffic manager to simplify and unify the access and security that you're putting in place. And I'll break this out a little bit more inside the rest of the slides. And then what I think is the coolest part of the product, and we're not going into the details today, but if anyone wants to see some more on this, the Visual Policy Editor I think is by far and away the coolest part of the solution. And this gives you an actual graphical workflow type interface to be able to create your security policies based on whatever business logic or business needs you have. So it might be checking your endpoint, providing ACLs, handing out access to VMware View based on Active Directory attributes. Whatever you want to do, this is your one-stop shop for being able to provide that in a really granular and flexible and cool way. And then finally, I think on everyone's table is bring your own device initiatives and how you're going to support that and secure those end devices and be able to provide that VDI experience to those endpoints in a secure and meaningful way. And F5 certainly helps in that aspect. So that's kind of setting the scene, guys. And really, the way that we see ourselves sitting in front of VDI is pretty much the same as any other application. Whether it's Exchange, SharePoint, PeopleSoft, whatever you want to put there. The way that we sit and perform, a central point of control using these access controls and simplifying the access. That's kind of the general premise of what Local Traffic Manager and Access Policy Manager do in combination to be able to provide access to VDI. So there's nothing particularly special. We can do this for anything, but obviously today we're focusing on VDI. So kind of going from the ground up to set the scene on where we play with inside this space. So if you're not familiar with F5, then our background is availability and scalability. So this is with Local Traffic Manager and Global Traffic Manager. So these are our application delivery controller products. So the first sort of inroad here is looking at the traffic management. So being able to load balance VMware View servers or pods, and this might be within data center or across data center. That's one of the big advantages of the F5 appliance is that these features can be all used in combination. They're not point solutions. I'll sort of play that out a little bit more later on in the slides as well. So Local Traffic Manager is kind of the first iteration of that. And then the second is looking at this in a global spotlight. If you have data centers within inside the US, EMEA, and APAC, then being able to put together a global sort of view of this infrastructure, such as if you have roaming users within inside these different theaters, that they're just going to mycompany.vdi.com or whatever it might be. And through the use of intelligent DNS, you're able to put them into the best data center or the fastest or closest or whatever makes sense for your solution. So this is what we call global traffic management, and it gives you the ability to make sure that these users are getting the best experience within inside the data center. And this was kind of broken out with what we call single namespace, just to give you an idea of how this sort of comes together. So you might have local users connecting into the data center, going through an F5 appliance and getting to their VDI. Or you might have them roaming, or you might have them redirected to the preferred data center based on the fact that we do a geolocation lookup and the data center is closer to them. Or again, as I was saying, you could have it based on the fastest, the least hops, or whatever would be logical for you to get that user to the best VDI infrastructure for the best user performance, experience, and security. So within inside the VMware world, and today we're going to concentrate on two of the VDI main players. So that's VMware and Citrix. So a key aspect of VMware View is being able to do persistence based on the username. So one of the great things about F5 is the flexibility. So I won't go into the technical details of this, but some of the cool flexible functions within inside Access Policy Manager and LTM allow us to look into the data that's coming through us and be able to pick out the username and provide persistence to the first VDI that you've landed on, so that you don't have any broken user sessions. So this is a key little aspect that we can add to that infrastructure that you're deploying. And then obviously as part of the user experience, single sign-on is a reasonably key aspect. And this may be something like logging into your laptop, connecting through to a VPN, and then into that actual VMware instance. And the way that we're able to do single sign-on is to make sure that that user experience is just a single login. So it would be the login to the laptop. We could then use those credentials to connect through to a VPN, and then also repass them back into the VMware infrastructure so that the user has just got that single login experience. And there's many different ways that you can dice up single sign-on within inside the F5 appliance. So this is just to give you guys an overview and a little taster as to what is possible in that space. One of the big marketing releases that we had over the last month or two is the addition of the PC over IP proxy inside VMware. So we've always been able to deploy VMware through local traffic manager and access policy manager, provide those availability and access controls and security and all the rest of it. But we didn't actually have a full proxy for the PC over IP protocol. So now that's in place, we've got a lot more use cases and a lot more value that we can bring to the VMware infrastructure story. So to give you an idea, you've got your PC or mobile device where you're using PC over IP, which is done through datagram TLS encryption. So this has got some great benefits. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Effectively, as we were talking about before, with being able to improve performance, this is with your voice, audio, data streaming, anything that's UDP-based protocol is going to see the benefits of using PC over IP. I'll talk about that a little bit more detail as we go through this. But some of the other plays here that might not be obvious off the bat, even something simple as terminating SSL on the F5 appliance. So you're offloading that heavy lifting from the back-end infrastructure. Doing these small little elements actually add up to a big gain in terms of how you're using the tin where you're hosting these VMware servers. And being able to get additional density inside that infrastructure, is going to save you guys money in the long run. So our SSL offloading is done inside hardware. So all of that grunt work, the heavy lifting, is done in a hardware chip. Doesn't affect us, doesn't affect our backend infrastructure, and makes more room for you guys to expand with little cost. So one of the benefits of us adding the PC over IP proxy was being able to replace the VMware security server. So in your typical infrastructure, you'd have the security server, your connection server, then the back-end desktops. So now we're able to replace that function, and I'll flesh that out a little bit more. But there's some other key elements here in terms of security that having us as that focal point rather than the security server, we're able to add these additional functions on. So inside our appliances, we can have the FIPS HSM. So you've got that compliance here if required. Also, as part of Access Policy Manager, you've got the ability to do endpoint inspection. So you can check those endpoints for antivirus, firewall, hard disk encryption, whatever makes sense to make sure those end devices are as secure as they possibly be. And then also you've got all of the AAA access controls and authorization controls that Access Policy Manager brings to the party in terms of being able to talk to Active Directory, LDAP, RSA, Kerberos constrained delegation, pretty much anything you can think of in the access world, coupled with single sign-on. And then I'm not going to talk about the numbers and figures and details, but the scalability of how many concurrent users that Access Policy Manager can handle, more or less blows our competition out of the water. So our high-end chassis boxes, to give you an idea, is capable of supporting 100,000 concurrent users. In my experience over the last 6 or 7 years, that's pretty much any enterprise in the world globally. So Those performance and scalability figures are pretty much world-class. And then I touched on this in a little bit at the start, but iApps, is by far and away the quickest, easiest, simplest deployment method that you're going to see for VDI and pretty much any application, to be honest. But we work very, very hard to create simple, easy to use templates, so that you literally can have an administrator that knows your infrastructure well, knows VDI well, can answer simple templated questions. We create all the objects in the background. You don't need to know the F5 appliance or software inside and out. And it literally puts this together, as long as everything's working in terms of communication, all the standard stuff you'd expect. Then you bring down implementation times from days or weeks down to minutes or hours, and the overarching view that you get once that's configured and set up gives you the ability to see what objects you've got configured in F5, how they pair together, how the monitoring is working, single sign-on, all the rest of it. So this is one very, very cool feature of F5. Now to look at the PCoIP Proxy in a little bit more detail. So your typical deployment before we had this functionality with Inside Access Policy Manager would look like this. And we've now got the ability to remove that security server layer from the infrastructure. So obviously, there's a raft of improvements there. We spoke about that in a few previous slides. But you're saving costs, maintenance, time, rack space, cooling, all of that cool stuff by being able to break this down. Also, it takes away the one-to-one dependency between the security and connection servers, and it just simplifies the whole infrastructure and implementation. And then again, I touched on this at the start of the presentation. We now have a full Layer 4 stateful network firewall as part of our security solution suite. So this can be used in combination with Access Policy Manager and with Local Traffic Manager, so doing the availability piece, doing the access control piece, and now doing also the firewall piece. So if you had, or if you do have legacy or end-of-life firewall equipment and you're looking to put in a VDI or VMware View infrastructure, then these roles and pieces can be rolled in together, collapsed and consolidated. It doesn't have to look like that, but the option is there, and it's a nice story for F5 to be able to bring that to the table and show a very simple implementation process and architecture. So sort of moving a little bit along now away from VMware and more into the Citrix world. And we just wanted to set the scene on what a sort of traditional access layer might look like in the Citrix world. And it's a little bit like VMware View, but there's a few different terminologies and areas to the architecture. So you might have your remote access gateway. So this might be Access Policy Manager. You might have a couple of different firewalls there, depending on what your compliancy and security controls dictate. You might have a VDI access device that's putting access controls in place. Again, this might be Access Policy Manager. And you might have an enterprise application access device. And all of these would be different segments and point solutions, and would build up the infrastructure that's required to deploy Citrix. So I'm going to do the time-honored, let's put Big IP as a box in there. But the reality is that with the features and functions provided with Local Traffic Manager, Access Policy Manager, and Advanced Firewall Manager, which is the Layer 4 stateful network firewall, all of these separate individual elements can actually be collapsed and consolidated into one single piece. And this kind of brings together the Optimise, Simplify, and Unify story. And just to show you this in a little bit more detail, we're going to put together the pieces here. So in your typical deployment scenario of Citrix, you would probably have NetScaler, which would be the focal point similar to Access Policy Manager. You've got the secure ticketing servers. You've got the Citrix web interface to be able to provide that interface into the XML brokers, so you can have your published apps or published desktops. And in the Citrix world, all of these elements are required to be able to deploy the desktops or applications. In the F5 world, we are actually able to provide the same functionality as those aspects. So we can be the Citrix web interface. We don't require the STA as part of our implementation. In fact, in our view, we provide better controls than the controls put in place by the STA servers. So this is not required. So literally all we have is communication between the XML brokers to get the desktop that the end user is requesting, whilst bringing single sign-on, the access controls. Also, we can do the firewalling piece as well. So in our eyes, this is a very, very simple architecture and allows you to remove, tin, maintenance costs, operational overhead from this architecture, and hopefully simplify your life when doing this deployment. And we wanted to give you an idea of what that might look like. So this is what we call the web top, or the web interface in Access Policy Manager. And this is where you would have your different desktops or applications or VPN or whatever it might be. So this would be the actual user experience once you've logged into Access Policy Manager, where you would see all the different applications that you've got available for you based on the security controls that we've put in place for that particular user. And if you've been around F5 for a year or two, you're probably very familiar with this slide. But this is actually true, and I've done a number of Citrix deployments where the enterprise or IT CTO has been able to take out these point solutions, which is the three Citrix products you can see there, remove the need for two firewalls. That might be one firewall, it might be two, it depends on the infrastructure and architecture. But realistically, the features and functions in Access Policy Manager, Local Traffic Manager, and Advanced Firewall Manager are able to provide all of the functions that you would have in the rest of that infrastructure in terms of Citrix and firewalling. And we're quite proud of and have put a significant amount of engineering into making sure this is scalable, robust, and secure solution. And just to kind of summarize for you guys, we kind of understand at F5 that Citrix and VMware are the market leaders in this space. And we'd certainly like to consider ourselves the market leaders in the application delivery controller space. So for us, it makes sense to combine those two best-of-breed products and make sure that you've got an optimized, simplified, unified solution that's secure, scalable, and gives you the best infrastructure and architecture going forward, and being able to make it a successful VDI deployment. And then to finish off, guys, we've got a couple of shameless plugs in terms of our professional services. So we have a fantastic team here at F5 in our PS organization, and these guys live and breathe these deployments day in, day out. If you'd like to get some more information or pricing, actually I'm not sure if there is that here. No, there isn't. Yeah, we don't have pricing. If you'd like some more pricing, then please approach a partner, or if you're working with a major account manager or a territory account manager, please see these guys. They'll be able to put you in contact with the right people. But there's obviously, if you don't have the expertise in-house, then professional services is the best way to speed up this deployment, take away your pain points, and make sure you've got a rubber stamp solution that F5 has put in place for you. And just to kind of wrap that up, the service that they're offering is virtual desktop deployment service. So there's the 4 key elements to what they can do. So they would sit down, look at what you're trying to achieve, plan how you want to do it, whether it's greenfield or into existing infrastructure, put together a plan, statement of work, do all the configuration, and then implement that. And then there is also the possibility to have follow-up for infrastructure changes or configuration changes. So it's a really neat and very effective service. And then finally, we are at VMworld in Barcelona in 2013 as a gold sponsor. So if anyone is planning to attend that, please come down to the stand, have a chat with the guys. They'll have demos, white papers, all the usual stuff that we have at the trade shows. And it's usually a good time in Barcelona. I certainly have the last time I was there. So hopefully you guys can get there and check it out. But from F5 and from myself, that's it for the presentation today, guys. And I think we will open first to the questions in chat, and then the operator will open the line for questions over the phone. But thank you very much for listening, guys, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day if you don't come through for questions.
This is the operator. Do you want me to go ahead and give instructions on how to ask questions on the line at this time?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, because it does take a few minutes. Anyone wishing to ask a question over the phone today, please go ahead and press *1. State your name at the prompting. Your name is required to introduce your question. It is *1 to ask a question, *2 to withdraw a request. *1 to ask a question. So like I said, it can take a few minutes before questions start coming through. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Please stand by for the first question. One moment. Matt Smith, your line's open. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, hi, Rich. It's Matt here, Computer Links. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, mate. Yourself?
Very well, sir. Very well indeed. Thanks for that. Very useful. Just a quick question, really. The lines or the layers of infrastructure you're taking out in terms of the Citrix stuff, do you have any numbers or kind of stats that we're able to put into a Prezzo or talk to customers about in terms of typical ROI or savings by taking out those layers of infrastructure?
Good
that makes
question,
sense.
mate. Yeah, no, we don't have any off-the-shelf collateral that we can give you for that. I think, we'd probably just look at that case by case. But if you've got a use case or something specific, then obviously just come to us, mate, and we can put something together. But that's a good suggestion, actually. I'll note that down. Yeah,
I've just had some customers say, the story is very, compelling, and it clearly makes sense. But kind of customers embarking on this from day one, it's kind of like, right, okay, really, what's the cost of this Citrix secure ticketing authority? What's the cost of the web interface? If I have everything in HA pairs across a couple of data centers, what does that come out in at? And then if I'm taking that out, what's that really saving me? So, we don't distribute Citrix here, as you probably know. So, but it'd be good to see if we could get some numbers. So we could say, look, we've had a user case save, 50 grand. It has a capex, and then the opex was another 20% of that, or whatever it was. So, anything you or the guys there could bring on that would be useful, Rich.
Yeah, sure, man. I'm pretty sure he's on the line, but we've got a fantastic product marketing management team who've just been doing a whole bunch of ROI stuff. So
Great.
I'll add that onto their list, mate.
Thanks, mate. Cool. All from me. Cheers.
All right, have a good one.
And that was the only question I had standing by, sir.
Fantastic. Okay. All right, guys. Enjoy your afternoon. Again, thank you for listening, and take care.
And at this time, all parties are welcome to go ahead and disconnect. At this time, all parties are welcome to go ahead and disconnect. Thank you for joining, and have a great